Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folktales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and today there's actually a rainstorm happening. I don't think my microphone's picking it up because I recently learned how to use my microphone properly. So it's not picking up ambient noise, which is for the best because now there's less interruption from the barking peppers in the neighborhood. But there's like thunder and rain. It's so beautiful, and I'm just having the time of my life. And it's almost October, if you can believe it. Today, we are going to talk about the tree of life. What is the tree of life? And I guess my real question is, it why is it in every single culture? I have a theory that plants are the original life form. Plants are life, and all other living things exist to pollinate and spread plants. Like just how bees pollinate plants, but plants existed before bees. So it's almost as if bees exist to pollinate plants. And I think that's true for all living things. This is like my personal theory, okay? And part of why I think this is because in my opinion, I think plants are enlightened. Plants are sentient, and I personally believe that they are enlightened. And so I find it fascinating that the idea and the archetype of the tree of life exists in almost every single ancient culture. And I think that a part of that is that deep down, intuitively, people have seen in visions, have seen when they've done drugs, have seen when they meditate that the tree is the mother of life. The tree is the prototype of life. And we all exist as a part of an ecosystem of trees. I love plants. And I actually think of humans as ambulatory plants. There's a lot of biological and visual and spiritual things that play into my theory. But ultimately, what I want you to think about for now is this idea of like roots, like this pattern that roots create through the soil, like is mimicked everywhere. Like even our veins and our nervous system like look like tree roots. Or like for example, if a person is to get pregnant, the fertilized egg will root into the endometrium as if a seed is rooting into soil and it grows roots. I mean, like it's like the literal and symbolic evidence is everywhere. And so anyway, I just want to plant that seed in your brain as we talk about the tree of life and think about the tree of life as a concept that has affected all humanity. I do want to bring up an honorable mention. I do have an episode about Christmas, and in that episode, I talk about the Christmas tree. And the idea of cutting a tree down and putting in your house is a very new concept. It originally started in Germany and parts of Europe, where during the darkest time of year, people would decorate trees in their town or village, usually like the biggest tree in the center of their town or village. They would decorate it, they would leave wishes, they would light candles, and it was kind of praying and planting seeds for the next year, for the next harvest, but also like worshiping this tree. And in my opinion, I think that kind of goes back to the even more ancient world where trees were really seen as the center of life, the giver of life, and life itself. And then as time went on, it just kind of turned into winter festivals and then was co-opted by a royal family. The world caught on, and now we kill millions of trees each year to decorate them because it's it's just a pattern, I don't know. There's my hot take. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, since the dawn of time, humanity has looked to the trees, their roots digging deep into the earth, their trunks anchoring our world, their branches stretching into the heavens. Trees are givers of fruit, of shade, of medicine, of wood, of life. However, if as above, so below, and as below, so above, what if trees were so much more than all of these physical attributes? What if they were, in fact, givers of life on a cosmic and interdimensional scale? Nearly every culture on earth tells of a tree of life, a sacred being that connects the underworld to the earthly realm and to the heavens. The tree is at once the axis of the world, the promise of immortality, and the reminder of death and rebirth. Today, we will journey through these myths from Mesopotamia to the Maya, from the Norse to the Egyptians, from the Celtic to the Bodhi tree, and the sky woman of North America. And along the way, we are going to tell some little folk tales. And I just want you to think about the tree and what it meant to your ancestors. Think about the thousands, millions of people in your bloodline that had to live and procreate for you to exist, and how their lives were affected by trees, and what kind of connection they may have had with nature. All right, bitch, let's get into it. Okay, so let us begin with Mesopotamia, classic. We all love to start with Mesopotamia chronologically. It is the ancient culture that we have the most information on. I'll say it once and I'll say it again. According to many historians, Mesopotamia is the first real human civilization. Personally, I disagree. I think there were civilizations before Mesopotamia, but we don't have those on record, so alas. So, with our records, the earliest tree of life imagery is over 4,500 years old. They have images that they have discovered carved into Sumerian and Assyrian cylindrical seals of trees of life. In Mesopotamia, these trees were often stylized palm trees or date trees, and they would often have a guardian spirit. It is believed that these trees were symbols of fertility, of divine order, and of kingship. And specifically, the date palm. We love the date palm. The date palm was central to Mesopotamian life. It gave fruit, syrup, wine, fiber, wood, and shade. Farmers cultivated them in irrigated fields, seeing them as literal givers of life. And of course, the date palm appeared in the myth of Inanna and Gilgamesh, a symbol of the cosmic center of abundance and divine authority. The other thing I want to mention too, maybe you know about this, but allegedly, if you spit on a seed before you plant it, it will grow to compensate for the minerals that you're lacking. So like maybe you have an iron deficiency. By spitting on a seed before you plant it, the plant will create extra iron to nourish you. We have like a symbiotic relationship. And I read recently that dates are amazing. They're so good for you. They're anti-parasitic. They're delicious, but they're really good for your digestion. But I read recently that also if a woman in her third trimester of pregnancy eats like 6 dates a day for the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy, it there something happens where her labor is often much easier and much faster because there's a nutrient in the date that helps the body make contractions. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that if the date palm was a huge cultivated tree and fruit in the ancient world, perhaps its symbiotic relationship with humans is what made it so good for humans. Like humans spent so much time cultivating it that it grew to be advantageous for humans so that humans would grow it. So like in a way, it's almost like the dog and human relationship. Like they grew together and therefore they grew more compatible, right? There's just my theory. Okay, so let's do a quick little story about the date palm in the Inanna and Gilgamesh tree, the Inanna and Gilgamesh story. And so in this story, the tree is referred to as the Hulupu tree. Okay, so imagine on the banks of the wide Euphrates River in ancient Mesopotamia, where the waters raged in flood, a single tree was carried by the current. The goddess Inanna, lady of heaven and earth, saw it and pulled it from the river. She planted it in her sacred garden, tending it with care. In her heart, she dreamed from this tree she would carve a throne to sit as queen, and a bed to which to rest as a bride. But the hulupu tree grew unruly, and its roots a shining serpent coiled, never to be charmed. In its branches the great Anzu bird made its nest, spreading its wings against the sky. In the hollow trunk Lilith, the dark maiden of the night, found her dwelling. Inanna despaired. Her holy tree had become a world of its own, sheltering beings wild and untamed. So she called upon her brother Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk. With his mighty axe, Gilgamesh slayed the serpent, frightened the Anzu bird, and sent Lilith fleeing into the desert winds. Then he cut the tree, and from its wood he made Inanna her throne and her bed. Yet the people remembered every tree of life is not only a gift, but a gathering place, an ecosystem. Serpent, bird, spirit, and goddess all have their dwelling in its roots and its branches. To plant a tree is to plant a world. Interestingly, too, I think that it's important to think about this symbol of the snake being at the roots of the tree and the bird being in the top of the tree. I mean, obviously, this is very literal. Snakes live on the ground and birds live in the trees in the sky. But also, it reminds me of the allegorical kundalini, which is the coiled serpent at the base of the spine. And perhaps this is an allegory for consciousness, for the central nervous system, and the snake is the kundalini energy, and the bird is the higher self, the enlightened self. And anyway, this is where my brain goes. Please write in with your theories. Email in, babe. I also, we're going to have to do an episode on Lilith, but Lilith is like a huge can of worms. There's so much to talk about there. And it's just a reminder that Lilith is post, sorry, pre-biblical. And I think sometimes we forget that. The Bible is a collection of stories that come from even more ancient stories that were an oral tradition. And Lilith is an OG. Never forget. Okay, now let's touch on the world tree of Norse mythology, Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is known to be a great ash tree, described in the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. This is the name of what we now call the collection of Norse mythology. Interestingly, even though most people agree that Yggdrasil is an ash tree, some people believe that Yggdrasil was a linden tree, and the linden tree is still used on many currencies throughout Europe and in many like coat of arms and what have you. Specifically in Eastern Europe, but also parts of Scandinavia, there are so many depictions of the linden tree, like all over. So some people believe that Yggdrasil could have been a linden tree, and this is also a really common last name in Scandinavia is Lindberg, and Lindberg is the hill of the linden tree, just for some context. Okay, So, according to Norse mythology, Yggdrasil is a tree that binds the nine worlds. It combines the worlds of the gods, Asgard, and the realm of humans, Midgard, and the land of the dead, Hel, and the land of giants, Jotunheim, as well as many more. And so Yggdrasil is a connection point of those realities, which I think is fitting because trees really do live interdimensionally, literally and figuratively. So, according to the Norse mythology, the roots of Yggdrasil lie in the well of Urd, where the Norns carve destiny. Mm. There are sacred groves in Scandinavia where they would practice sacrifice. They would sacrifice animals and even humans, and they would hang them in the trees. The trees were both temples and cosmic maps. And according to their beliefs, Yggdrasil was not eternal. Dragons gnawed at its roots, decay crept into its bark. The Norse people believed all things, even the cosmos, would one day die. That's deep, babe. So let's talk a little bit about Odin's sacrifice. This is like a classic OG story that, of course, is about Odin and his sacrifice and Yggdrasil. High rose Yggdrasil, the world tree, tallest of all ash trees. Its branches brushed the heavens, and its roots coiled deep into the frost and fire. An eagle spread its wings at the crown, a dragon gnawed the roots, and a squirrel chattering ran the trunk, carrying insults from root to the sky. Odin, all father, longed for wisdom beyond gods and men. He knew of the runes of fate were hidden in the bark of Yggdrasil. To win them, he knew he must give himself as an offering. So he climbed the tree and hung upon its branches, pierced by his own spear. 9 days and 9 nights he swung, neither living nor dead. His face grew pale, his lips parched, his soul wandering the abyss. The winds cut him, the stars turned above, and still he endured. On the 9th night, the runes revealed themselves, glowing in the bark like fireflies in the dark. They whispered their secrets, spells, fates, in the language of creation. Odin fell from the tree, but he rose reborn, a god of wisdom, keeper of runes. And so Yggdrasil gave its gift, but only through suffering and sacrifice. The Norse knew all life hangs by a thread, and even the world tree itself trembles, awaiting the day of Ragnarok. Also, unsurprisingly, there's a lot of similar motifs here, a dragon gnawing at the roots of the tree and an eagle living in the branches. Now, granted, it is very possible that stories were being shared. There is historical evidence of the Vikings going into the Arab world years before people originally believed. But also, they have done studies of, for example, monkeys discovering how to open a fruit in a new way, and then monkeys on the other side of the world will start figuring it out within the same day. They have done studies of this, of like animals kind of being connected to a psychic channel. And so I do I do think that stories were traded between cultures. And I do think that many stories evoked a more universal and subconscious element as they were allegories. And I really do believe that ancient cultures, I mean, if they were using psychedelics, but they also were meditating, they were connected with earth. And I think that is why so many of them have so many overlapping stories about the nature of trees and their binding nature between the multidimensional reality. So then, of course, there is the tree of Kabbalah, the tree of life. Now, Kabbalah is what is known as Jewish mysticism. However, the Kabbalah was taught to the Jewish people by Moses, who was the Prince of Egypt. And so a lot of Judaism, and especially like the Kabbalah, is informed by ancient Egyptian beliefs and practices, which Moses learned and then taught the Jewish people. I've said it once and I'll say it again. So, according to the Kabbalah, and I have talked about this in other episodes, but the tree of life is called the Sephiroth in the Kabbalah. So, according to the Kabbalah, especially in medieval Spain and Safed, the tree of life became a map of the Sephiroth, the 10 emanations of the divine or God. They're known as almost like the faces of God, and then the pathways between them are considered the personalities of God. And guess how many there are? 22. And those correlate to the archetypes of the tarot. The archetypes of the tarot are based off of the pathways between the faces of God. And that is what makes the archetypal moments within consciousness. You are walking the pathway to God. And yeah, I have a 2-part episode on tarot. Check it out. So, in the diagram of the Sephiroth, there are all of these points, which are the emanations, the faces of God, and between them are pathways where it is believed that divine energy flows ultimately from Ein Sof, which is the infinite, which is like what God really is, the creator of the multiverse, and the energy flows all the way down to the bottom, which is essentially the material world. Mystics would meditate on this diagram, which they called the tree of life, and they would climb the tree spiritually, right? So, like, they would move their consciousness through the faces of God, through the pathways of consciousness to enlightenment. So, for every commandment known as the mitzvahs, it was seen as a way to heal a branch of the tree, an act of cosmic repair. See, so like the idea of the 10 Commandments was to align yourself with the values to allow you to climb the tree and repair the aspects of the tree that have broken within you. Fascinating. So, a little blurb, a little story time for the Kabbalah. In the beginning, there was no form, no edge, no root, no crown. Only the infinite, Ein Sof, without end. Then a ray of light broke forth, and it poured into 10 vessels. These became the branches and the fruit of the tree of life. Keter, the crown. Chokmah, wisdom. Bina, understanding. And downward to Malkuth, the kingdom of earth. The mystic closes his eyes and ascends the tree. With every act of mercy, he steps into Chesed. With every act of discipline, he walks in Gavura. Each prayer lifts him higher until he reaches the radiant crown, where all opposites are reconciled. The Kabbalah teaches this tree is not only in heaven, it grows in the soul of every person. To climb it is to mend yourself, and in doing so, to heal the world. And how beautiful is this? This allegory, this idea that consciousness itself is a tree and God is essentially the source and you live within its branches. And so therefore it is your destiny to travel within the body of the tree to reach the creator, the source, the seed. You know what I mean? Let's take a quick break. Are you a fan of the podcast and want everyone to know? Well, guess what? We have merch live. There are sweatshirts, t-shirts, tank tops, water bottles, stickers, all kinds of things. There's also some other like random fun things of my personal art. But why not get a tote bag, a tumbler, and a hoodie to tell the world that you listen to the pod? Check it out. There's a link in the description of this video and a link in the description of my podcast and channel. Check me out, babe. So, Now, of course, moving from Kabbalah, we have to talk about the Christian world. Now, I do want to mention there is a tree in Norse mythology that they talk about an apple tree that gives immortal life. And I do think that this is worth noting. Basically, there's an apple tree that is sacred and linked to the goddess Idun, who possesses golden apples that grant eternal youth and vitality to the gods. The Norse gods, who are not truly immortal but long lived, must consume these apples to prevent aging and death. Idun's apples symbolize long life, wisdom, love, and the story of their theft by the giant Thiazi and Loki, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, of course, the classic tree story in the Christian faith is about the apple tree in the Garden of Eden that Eve is not supposed to eat, and then she does. And in my opinion, it smells as if part of this story is borrowed from Norse mythology. This idea that there was these magical apples that would give eternal life to the gods, and that the gods didn't want mere mortals to eat them. So I do think that's like worth mentioning because in the Bible there are stories of the tree of life, which was known to give immortality. And then, of course, after Adam and Eve sinned, they were barred from the Garden of Eden by the cherubim, allegedly with a flaming sword. Also, this was Genesis that we're talking about, right? The Garden of Eden. But then later in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, the tree of life reappears in New Jerusalem. And, quote, the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Hmm. I find this really interesting, especially tying into this idea of a lot of ancient cities having a tree in the center that was a place of worship, um, or kind of seen as like the living heart of a city. So I find that fascinating. Also, medieval Christians saw the cross itself as the new tree of life. If you do Google the Sephiroth, it actually kind of does look like a cross, kind of. Not exactly, but a Christian cross could fit nicely and into the shape, if that makes sense. So, according to medieval Christians, they believe that Christ was the fruit whose blood restored eternal life. Oh, so dramatic, so gothy. Also, churches would often depict the tree of life, or the tree of Jess, which was tracing the lineage of Christ as a branching tree. They were obsessed with claiming that they were all biologically related to Christ, of course. So we all we all kind of know the story of the Garden of Eden. But I do kind of want to give like an interesting thought. And of course the story in a nutshell is that there is there's the tree of life and also the tree of wisdom, and God tells Adam and Eve that they should not eat from the tree, not eat an apple from the tree. Um, but of course, a snake comes and tells Eve to have a bite. She does. And she tells Adam to do the same. And then they're cast out of the garden and have to live amongst mere mortals outside of paradise. But I recently learned, because I'm writing a book right now, and anyway, I liked the name Alma. And I know in Spanish, alma is the word for soul, or yeah, spirit, soul. But I discovered it in a list. I was looking at Scandinavian names, and Alma was a Scandinavian name. And so I was interested and I looked into it, and I found that Alma is a word in like over 30 languages. And the most common definition of Alma is actually apple, and sometimes benevolent mother. It the meaning soul is more rare. That's Spanish, but most languages use the word alma for apple. So then I kind of like this is just like how my brain works, but my brain like became obsessed with this idea. Like if the word alma means apple or benevolent mother or soul, what if when the Bible was being interpreted, there was a complete misinterpretation? So what if the apple is an allegory for somebody's spirit, or an allegory for like a woman, like an allegory for like going down on a woman? Like what if, and I think we should just be asking ourselves these questions. What if our interpretations of these ancient stories are so off and we would have no way of knowing? Like euphemisms, for example. Like for example, sometimes people refer to a pussy, like a woman's genitalia, as a cookie or a muffin or a box, right? So like what if there are euphemisms from the ancient world that we just have no idea? And so we're interpreting things so literally and missing the allegories, both because I think we've, as modern humans, have lost our ability to see the poetic nature and allegory of things, but I think also we've lost the cultural context that has allowed us to interpret these stories. And that is why I'm so charmed by Indian culture, because in India, and I have mentioned this before, their beliefs and connection to spirituality um, are so allegorical, and it's fascinating to hear religious people in India interpret the scriptures of other religions, because to them the things that they see that are so obvious are all about allegory and not about like literal historical retellings. They see them as allegories for consciousness, and I find that to be very intriguing, fascinating. Then, of course, moving through the world, we have the Mesoamerican world tree known as the Ceiba. Ooh, the Ceiba or the Kapok tree. This was worshipped in the Maya world, and this is known as the Axis Mundi. Mundi means world. And fun fact, I, as I mentioned in my most recent episode, or I guess whatever, recently, I just did a silent retreat. And in my silent retreat, I did actually meet a past life version of myself who told me the word mundi. And I ended up doing a whole deep dive into the word mundi, which in Latin means world. Um, and, in Spanish, mundo derives from mundi. And I found out that in um, Hindi as well, mundi means world. However, in Sanskrit, mundi means shaved head, or like a monk with a shaved head. And so that's just like a little tidbit, some personal Sherlock Holmes detective work that I've been doing through my own visions and hallucinations. And so I have a theory. They claim that the word mundi, according like in the Latin etymology, is derivative of the word essentially mundane. So mundi, world, meaning the world of the mundane. But I have a theory, because Sanskrit is one of the mother languages of modern languages, that perhaps mundi, which meant shaved head, became like a slang term for world. Kind of how like in Portuguese they sometimes call the head the coconut. Like what if the world, they just call it the head? I don't know. Anyway, there's just one of my fringe theories. So, in the Maya tradition, the kapok tree is depicted with its roots reaching the underworld known as Xibalba, and its trunk in the earthly plane, its branches stretched into the 13 heavens. Four kapok trees, or sebas, marked the four cardinal directions, each painted a color. The white tree was the tree of the north, the red, the tree of the east, yellow, the tree of the south, and black, the tree of the west. Villages often planted a ceiba at their center, where offerings were made. And curanderos, or shamans, ascended in a trance to commune with the gods. Now, I hate sounding like a broken record. I am saying the word shaman because it is the word that we in English understand, but I try not to use the word shaman because it is an appropriative term. Sadly, as an English speaker, most words are rooted in colonial history and erasure of native history around the planet. But just for some context, the word shaman um, was created by Dutch explorers who were in parts of modern day Russia, which at the time was more tribal, snowy, indigenous people living with the earth. And there was people who were practicing magic and sorcery. They called them Saman, and the Dutch people just spelled it shaman. And then it became a blanket term for any type of person who practices any kind of spirituality or sorcery that the West doesn't really understand. Okay. Um, so just really quickly, the Ceiba tree or the kapok tree is known as the silk cotton tree. And it I'm trying to like get some pictures. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. They have these like really interesting pea pods. They almost look like miniature cacao fruits. And they grow all around Central America and the Caribbean. And they also grow in Asia. I'm just trying to confirm there's the tree known as the alamo, right? Alamo. And this um I'm getting sidetracked. In the Yucatan, which is where I am right now, there is a tree that grows into cenotes, and I'm pretty sure it's called the Alamo. Yes, Alamo. Wow, my memory's getting better. So this is not the ceiba tree. I just wanted to make sure. No, no, it is the ceiba tree. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, I was right. So the tree of life, according to the Maya, is the ceiba tree, which is known as the Alamo. And it is true, its roots do go into the underworld because there are all of these cenotes, which are like caves underground, and the roots go so deep in the ground, and that's how they would often find cenotes. They would see one of these trees and they would know that there must be a cenote underneath because they always grow above cenotes. Interestingly, too, this type of tree is actually in the same species as the strangler fig, which is a wild fig variety that grows in Central America, and it's a parasitic tree. It's fascinating. Do a deep dive into that. I highly recommend. And so I just think it's really, again, important to remember that these are almost the same stories in every culture. This idea of trees interdimensionally connecting realities. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I do think, and I know that all humanity does share a subconscious. We all are one individual experiencing multidimensional reality through experiencing bodies, but we all come from the same realm. And the tree is like the blueprint, it's the map of what reality really looks like. And we are somewhere in there, either in the trunk, in the leaves, in the branches, in the roots, like who's to say? But that's just my opinion. Okay, so a little story time of the Seba tree. When the world was new, the gods gathered to create a bridge between realms. They planted a great Seba tree. Its roots burrowed in the 9 layers of Xibalba, the underworld. Its trunk rose through the realm of men. Its crown spread into the heavens, where the sacred bird Itzamye perched, feathers shimmering like the sun. Kind of reminds you of the Mesopotamian tree and Kabbalah and Norse. You know what I'm saying? The Seba became the road of souls. The dead descended its roots. The curanderos climbed its trunk, and the gods walked its branches. Its four siblings stood at the edges of the world, painted red, white, yellow, and black, holding the cosmos in balance. Even now, when the Maya plant a ceiba in the plaza, they are not planting only a tree, they are planting the center of the world, the ladder of heaven, the bridge of the soul. Oh my God, literally, what? It just kills me. Trees are so magical. Have you ever talked to a tree? This is a PSA. If you have not talked to a tree, I highly recommend it. It can be hard when you start, especially if you don't meditate or spend time alone in nature, but you can talk to trees and you can hear their answers, and it's incredible. The best thing to do is to go on a walk by yourself, ideally in nature, perhaps in a forest or a park, and to be barefoot and to spend a couple hours if you can with one tree, just looking at it, observing it, feeling it. Once you spend some time connecting, then you can telepathically start asking it questions and they will respond. Let me tell you, I love trees. I love plants. They're so magical. That's where the fairies live. So, next up, we have the Egyptian Ished tree. The Ished tree grew in Heliopolis, sacred to Ra. On its leaves, oh my gosh, hold on. Whoopsies, had to sneeze. On the leaves of the Ished tree, Thoth inscribed the names of kings, granting them immortality. Again, the tree of immortality. Sycamore trees were sacred to Nut and Hathor, who offered food and drink to the dead. Pharaohs were shown receiving fruit and water from goddesses in the tree. Planting and tending trees in temple gardens was an act of cosmic renewal. I'm telling you. And so the story goes. In the temple of Heliopolis grew the tree of Ished. Its branches spread wide. Its leaves glittered in the sun. Upon those leaves, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, wrote the names of kings. To inscribe a name was to give it life beyond death, to bind it to the stars. The dead longed for the tree. In tomb paintings, the goddess Nut stretched from its trunk, offering a cup of cool water and bread from her branches. To drink beneath the tree was to taste eternity. Thus, the Ished tree was not only wood and leaf, but the memory of kings, the promise of rebirth, the nourishment of souls, prophecy itself. I'm this is giving me chills. I don't know if this is affecting you in the same way, but it's giving me chills. Every single one of us has ancestors who are worshiping trees and talking to trees and making art of trees. I'm thinking about all the embroidery throughout Europe of like trees embroidered on aprons and clothes. I'm thinking about all of these inscriptions and murals in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Mayan world. Like trees are everywhere. The wood that they're building houses out of, like trees, fruits. So many fruits grow on trees. And I'm almost at a loss for words. I just for some reason, specifically the tree of life is like really making me see in my brain, I'm seeing like humans across time, humans across the planet, like communing with trees. It's so magical. It's literally so magical. And the trees are still here. And some trees are thousands of years old. And through trees, we can commune with the ancestors. Oh my God, I'm getting worked up. Let's take a break. Hi, it's me, Annabelle. And if you've made it this far, I appreciate you so much. please like and subscribe my channel, my page. I have so many kinds of content and I'm working on new kinds. You may be listening to me just through my podcast or through YouTube. You should check out my YouTube if you're not watching or listening to me there. I have meditation videos. I have yoga videos coming soon. I have my full length podcast. I'm doing short episodes. I'm doing shorts, and soon I'm going to be having listener episodes. So, like, subscribe. Thanks, babe. Love you. Ugh, I feel such a huge sense of peace and calm just even talking about trees. I feel like my heart like opening. It feels so beautiful. Okay, so next up, we have the Celtic tree of life, which is known as the Cran Bethad. Um, we're doing our best on the pronunciation. We're trying as a native English speaker. You get what you get. So, the Celts honored sacred trees as clan symbols, and each settlement and group would have their own central tree, often an oak tree or an ash tree. And to cut down another tribe's tree was considered an act of war. That's so deep. You know what it kind of is making me think of too, like in the Viking era and in the area of the era of the Saxons, which were like the Germanic barbaric tribes of Germany who were descendants of native Germans and of Vikings, they would often use fire as their favorite modality of war. And so, like the Black Forest, for example, is hand planted and allegedly has been burned down countless times by the Saxons. Um, and so I'm thinking about this because if in the ancient world, in the Celtic tradition, if you were to set fire to somebody's tribe's tree, it would be war. Like, what's even crazier is to burn down a forest. Like, that really is war. It's like intense. It like hurts my heart. So, in the Celtic world, druids were taught in sacred groves. And so essentially when people would learn their magical rites and learn the oral traditions and learn magic and sorcery and learn about the stars, they would learn in the forest and they saw trees as mediators between worlds. Again, like every other society, trees are the mediators between worlds. So their tree of life, known as the Cran Betad, represented ancestry, connection with earth, and cosmic order. Like, like, uh, uh, I could cry. You know what this reminds me of? Earlier, I was talking about talking to trees, and I'm not sure if I've told this story on the podcast, but there is this amazing book which I'm obsessed with, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning, and it's written by a man named Dr. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust as a prisoner, the German Holocaust, Hitler's Holocaust. I say that because there have been many Holocausts, and I think we should stop saying the Holocaust because that's not specific. So, Hitler's Holocaust, there was a man, Viktor Frankl, who was a practicing psychologist and therapist, and he was taken to a prison camp in Poland when he was 26, and he had been a practicing therapist for 2 years. And he ended up surviving, honestly, like using his brain, using his information as a doctor and a psychologist to manipulate his way to safety. And he ended up writing a book talking about his experience, but also giving really interesting insight into the Holocaust as a psychologist. And the thing that I found most arresting about the book is that, of course, a Holocaust is a very extreme situation. But he made parallels to just human behavior and recognized that the behavior within the context of this internment camp was actually the same behavior that humans exhibited outside. It was just more intense because the setting was more intense. Okay, so look, let me break it down really quick, not to make this huge long tangent, but it ties in to trees and talking to trees, which is why I'm thinking about it. So, according to Viktor Frankl, the behavior of both prisoners and the prison guards, the Nazis, were actually very similar. And what I mean by that is about 80% of people in both groups were basically followers. They were doing what they believed they had to do to survive. So many Nazis were not pro genocide, but they felt like that was their only option. They had to be Nazis. There was no other choice. That was their inner narrative. I have to do this, right? And of course, most of the prisoners were the same. Oh my God, they don't want to be there, but they're forced to be there. They have to be there. And so both, that was 80%. Sometimes like closer to 90% of everyone is basically just doing what they believe they have to do. And of course, this applies to the real world. Like that actually is kind of how the world works. Majority of people are not really making autonomous decisions. They're doing what they believe they have to do based on what is socially acceptable or socially expected, or in some cases, they are truly being forced or they perceive they're being forced. They're put in a very difficult position. Okay, then about 10 to 20% of people actually kind of enjoy it. So, of course, in the Nazi group, many of them took a lot of joy in hurting people and killing people and just being very violent and like got high off that power. Interestingly, though, in the prisoner group, that was the same percentage. There was a percentage of people, they called them capos, and they were basically like informants. They would get extra privileges from the Nazis and they would enforce violence. They would, they were basically like rats. They would like rat out other prisoners. And he noticed that a lot of the prisoners that did this were people who worshiped money. People that in the real world were either already rich and like needed to be more powerful than others, or people who desperately wanted to be rich, like often like thieves and burglars, like people who are willing to steal wealth, were more interested in being what they called capos. And then he talked about a very rare percentage, which was like 1%. And this was only prisoners. This was not with the Nazis, but there was like a 1% of people who basically were like reaching enlightenment, or at least they claimed they were. And so imagine everyone's on autopilot. Everyone is literally dissociated and not present. And there was people who were starting to like have spiritual experiences. Of course, in the Jewish faith, when you have a bar or bat mitzvah, you memorize part of the Torah. And part of why they do that is because a big aspect of Judaism comes from being enslaved originally in Egypt. So the idea is becoming an adult is having to memorize part of the scripture so that it lives within you no matter what the circumstances. So interestingly, Viktor Frankl, the author of this book, talked about people starting to like recite the Torah in their mind and like start to have revelations. And like he specifically talked about a woman that he interacted with. Eventually, part of why Viktor Frankl survived is that he was transferred from a factory into what they called the hospital, and it was basically like a cabin with cots where people were slowly dying, and he just watched them die. But there was a woman that was transferred to this quote hospital, and she was deemed too crazy to work, but there was nothing wrong with her. But she was basically having like a spiritual awakening. And so she would go outside every day in the snow barefoot and talk to a tree. And of course, Victor himself was like partially dissociated. And so he found her bizarre. But one day he asked her, like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm talking to the tree. I talk to the tree every day. And he's like, aren't your feet cold? And she's like, no, not at all. And she like, didn't have any frostbite. And he said, like, what, like, does the tree respond to you when you talk? And she said, yes, of course, the tree responds to me. And he said, what does the tree say? And she said, the tree says, I am eternal life and I love you. And that story just hits me so hard because that's like, she's my role model. No matter how terrible the situation is or how scary the world gets, I never want to lose my connection with nature and with earth and with love. And I just want to take a moment here to remind everyone that there are active genocides happening on planet Earth right now. And being violent and being a person who is contributing to any kind of violence, let alone genocide, you're tripping. It's not correct. There is never an excuse for genocide. There's never a real excuse for war. There's never a real excuse for human on human violence. Sadly, we have built a world of exploitation and of violence, and so the cycle perpetuates because everyone is hurt and wants to seek revenge. I understand this dynamic, but it needs to end. Okay. Anyway, there was my long tangent. I love trees. That's the moral of the story is I love trees, and I believe that if more of us start spending more time in nature, more time listening to our bodies, more time talking to trees, we could actually heal ourselves and heal the planet. I literally am like about to cry. I'm tearing up. Okay, so I'm gonna tell a mini blurb about the Celtic tree of life, the Cran Betad. Again, if you are listening and you know about any of this stuff, if you grew up in cultures, families, communities where you were hearing stories like this from your family, like please write in because it's going to be way more enriching than the kind of research I can do as just like a guy, as a human being. Okay, but here's a little story about the tree of life. When a clan found a home, found a village, found a community, they planted a tree in its center. Beneath its branches, they gathered for weddings, councils, and rites. Its roots drank from the same soil as the people. Its branches sheltered their children. To cut down the tree was to sever the soul of the tribe. Yet while it stood, the people felt protected, bound to the other world. The Cran Betad, the tree of life, was not only a tree, but the tribe itself made visible. Roots in the past, branches in the future, trunk in the present, standing firm in the heart of the world. Uh, and again, this is kind of tying back into what I was mentioning earlier about Christmas, this idea that really in ancient Europe, people were decorating the tree that stood in the center of their community because that tree was a symbol of life itself and a symbol of their community. So during the darkest day of the year, the solstice, they would decorate it and light candles and place their wishes and their blessings. And that makes so much more sense, right? And sadly, through time and through a loss of connection with these ancient and sacred rituals, now we murder millions of trees and decorate them with silly ornaments that mean nothing. And I mean, even you, have you ever even wondered, like, why do people have Christmas trees? Like, people don't even know. They just do it because it's expected. And I'm not against the idea of decorating a tree. I'm just against the idea of cutting down a fucking tree to have in your house for maybe 1 month and then throwing it away. That's like horrific. That's like, no, 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 no. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. Okay, next up, we have what is known as the Ashvata tree, which is the tree of life in the Hindu tradition. This one is one of my favorites. So, the Ashvata tree, which is most likely a fig or a peepal tree and or a banyan tree. If you don't know, look up a banyan tree that has the most epic roots. Like when you think of like those huge trees with like crazy roots that look like serpents, it's a banyan tree. So the Ashvata tree is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a scripture of Hinduism. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, quote, there is a banyan tree with roots above, branches below. Its leaves, the Vedas. Vedas are scripture, so its leaves are scriptures. Um, so it's in the Hindu belief, the inversion of the tree basically being upside down, is the symbolizes the idea of Maya, the idea of the illusion of reality being a woven tapestry of illusion, of lies, and that truth itself lies deeper. So the roots are actually, they kind of think of it the opposite. The roots are the enlightened aspect, living in the dark, growing into the nothing realm. And then the top are is what you see, what you believe is real, but is actually just, and I actually kind of have a theory about this. I kind of believe that the real life of any plant is in the roots, and that the top, the above ground portion is almost like its hair. That's kind of how I see it. Interestingly, there are stories in ancient India of this Ashwata tree, the tree of life, being a giving tree. And there are stories of people lining up and going to this tree and asking it for anything, and it would literally give people anything they asked for. It would grant wishes, almost like a genie. And according to the myths, as time went on and people became more corrupt, they were exploiting the tree and taking branches from it and asking for more and more selfish things that eventually the tree stopped giving gifts and stopped talking to people, and it went silent. And again, one of my hot takes is I do believe that as humans we can talk to animals, we can talk to trees, we can talk to plants, and we can talk to the mountains and the ocean. And I do think that through what has been happening on earth energetically and socially, a lot of these things have gone silent. They've stopped talking to us because they're sad, their hearts are broken because we have created an abusive relationship. Oh my gosh, I could cry. Also, according to the Buddhist tradition, Buddha is said to have reached enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, which is also believed to be the same tree as the Ashwata. So it all ties in, babe. It all ties in. So, a little story about the Ashwata tree. It is said that a sage once looked upon the world and saw a strange tree. Its roots were in the sky, its branches stretched downward into the earth, its leaves were hymns and poems, its fruits were desires. Men plucked its fruits and feasted on its leaves, yet they forgot the roots above. This was the this was the Ashvata, the tree of illusion. To cling to its branches was to remain bound in Maya. But the wise cut it down with the sword of knowledge, tracing the root to its true source, the eternal spirit. And beneath its shade, centuries later, a man named Siddhartha sat in meditation. The tree sheltered him as he passed through fear, temptation, and darkness, until dawn rose and he became the Buddha. The Ashvata has given its greatest fruit, the fruits of enlightenment, of love. How magical. Literally, like, stuff like this makes me emotional. It reminds me that I actually love humanity. I love humans. And in my opinion, we've basically just become traumatized children. It's just how like a child becomes a bully on the playground because they're being abused by one of their parents. I really think that's what's happened to humanity. And of course, it's gotten really out of hand and horrifying. But ultimately, I do believe that to our core, humanity is beautiful and full of love. And just reading about trees and our connection to trees and our view of trees as these interdimensional guardians and givers of life, like it really touches me. I'm getting really emotional in this episode. I just find this so lovely and charming and beautiful, and that's my prayer. My prayer is that as humans we can start loving nature. I don't believe it's right to worship, but like worshiping nature, loving her. She's so beautiful and interdimensional, psychedelic, trippy, like everything. Let's take a quick break. This is your friendly reminder from your friend Annabelle that you are incredible. You are one of a kind. There is only one of you in this whole planet. Therefore, all of the things within you, the things that you see as your weaknesses, the things that you see as your strengths, they're your superpowers because you're the only one of you. You are supposed to be here right now. You're in the perfect place at the perfect time. What if you just believed in yourself? Like you literally got this. This is your reminder. Drink your water. Take care of yourself. Put the work into yourself. What if you really believed in yourself and you went for it? Why not? You got this, bitch. Not me, just crying about how much I love trees. Last step, last honorable mention. Again, there are so many trees of life. We're just, I could talk for 10 hours. We won't, maybe write in. If you want a 10-hour episode, write in. But next up, we have the Iroquois Great Tree. The Iroquois are a group of indigenous people of the Americas. And in Iroquois, they call their tree of life the Haudenosaunee. And I promise you I'm saying that wrong, and I deeply apologize. This tree, which they know as the Great Tree, grew in the sky world, and it was heavy with sacred fruit. When the Sky Woman fell through the hole beneath its roots, she carried seeds, planting them on Turtle Island's back to form the earth. Oh, literally, like, I'm just getting chills. Trees remained central to the life of the Iroquois. The great tree was considered a symbol of peace, and they believed that it was a white pine, its roots stretching in all four directions. So here's a little mini story of the great tree. Above in Sky World, the great tree spread its roots, bearing fruit that nourished all living things. But one day, Sky Woman leaned too close to its base, and the earth gave way beneath her. She fell down into darkness. Birds flew up to catch her, carrying her gently upon their wings. They set her upon Turtle's back, which floated on the endless waters. Sky Woman opened her hands, and in them were seeds from the great tree. She planted them in the soil. The muskrat brought from the deep, and from Turtle's back, the earth grew green. Every tree that grows today, every seed planted in soil, is the child of that great tree. And the Iroquois remember the world itself was born from the roots, the fruit, and the seeds carried in the hands of the falling woman. Ugh, I like literally am about to cry. This is just so beautiful. And this is something I know to be true, that life, the thread of life, this life grows from love. Love is what life is. Life is a collection of energy that is glued together by love. And I think maybe that's why I'm getting so emotional. Like all of these stories are just filled with love. And I think that's the legacy that plants leave, especially trees and flowers. I recently did an episode about grain and grass. And grass has a very important purpose. But I think humans have made grass their main diet. Grains and grass are the main diet of humans. And in a way, they if you are what you eat, humans are mimicking grass behavior. And I think trees, which are kind of the basis of life, the basis of all life is really trees. What if we were to be building our societies like forests, building our societies and building our personal experience like a tree, self-sustained, but shelter for others, a creator of ecosystems, a creator of worlds, planting seeds, spreading seeds, bearing fruit. Um, like just hypothetically, like what if each of us used a tree as our greatest inspiration and modeled our life after the life of a tree? And I mean, maybe this idea like seems weird to you, but like, it's not. Trees are much older than humanity. Trees are much older than all animals. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? And trees' existence and way of existence has lasted millions of years. And so perhaps we should be taking notes from trees and and how beautiful is it that across cultures, across the entire planet, everyone seems to have an idea of the tree being a bringer of life and a connector of the multidimensional reality. I just think that is so beautiful. The tree of life is not just a myth, it is a reminder. The trees give us breath, it gives us air, shelter, fruit, wood, medicine. Trees are living bridges between worlds. Perhaps our ancestors were telling us not only stories, but truths, that to care for the tree is to care for the cosmos, to care for the universe, to care for the multiverse. And to hurt a tree is to hurt ourselves. So, my dream and my dream for humanity is for us to connect with plants and ideally to start reforesting the earth. That really is my biggest dream. I would like to use my art and my creativity to generate income so I can reforest the earth. I would love to watch forests thrive, watch gardens thrive, and as they thrive, watch the animals thrive and watch humans thrive. It's not rocket science. It's pretty easy. If we plant forests, we don't really need much else. Food grows on trees, shelter grows on trees, medicine grows on trees. And I think also peace grows on trees, tranquility grows on trees, love grows on trees. And yeah, the trees are my best friends. And you, listener, are second place my best friend. I appreciate you so much for listening. It means so much to me. This is a passion project. I feel like I've just kind of been doing this, speaking into a void, but it means so much when you listen. It means so much when you reach out to me. I appreciate you so much, and I dream of building a community of like-minded people and friends who love talking about magic and the ancient world and about love. And yeah, let's be friends. Anyway, I'm sending you a big hug, and I'll catch you next time.